Hi, my name's Odalyn. My own sister forged my signature for a $1.2 million loan. She bought a mansion with my name on the papers. And at her housewarming, she smirked and asked, "How did you even get in here?" Everyone laughed. But they didn't know the truth. I'd already forgiven her once, and she used it against me. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment below. I want to know, what would you have done if your own family treated you like you didn't belong? Saturday mornings had always been my quiet sanctuary. I'd brew a fresh pot of coffee, step out onto the porch of my small Houston home, and let the early spring breeze brush across my face. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs or carried grocery bags in from their cars. My life wasn't flashy, but it was steady. I worked hard as a mortgage officer, kept my bills paid, and stayed out of trouble. Stability meant something to me, especially since my family rarely acknowledged what I'd built for myself. That morning, though, peace shattered in the most unexpected way. I carried the mail inside, a small bundle of envelopes and flyers, and sat down at the kitchen table. Flipping through, I noticed one with the bank's logo. I frowned. I hadn't applied for anything recently. My stomach dropped as I tore it open. At first I thought it had to be some kind of mistake, a loan approval letter for $1.2 million. My eyes froze on the words. Then I saw the signature. My signature. Except it wasn't mine. My chest tightened. The curve of the O, the slant of the Y. It was close. Too close. Harper. There wasn't a shred of doubt in my mind. My older sister had always believed the world owed her more than it gave, and if she had to cut corners, or people, to get it, she did. But forging my name for a loan? That wasn't cutting corners. That was a knife straight to my back. I sat there, staring at the paper, my hands trembling. How long had she been planning this? How much damage had she already done? My mind raced with worst-case scenarios, ruined credit, endless debt collectors, my life's stability shattered because Harper decided she wanted more than she could afford. Before I could even catch my breath, another envelope slipped from the pile. It was glossy, decorated with embossed gold edges. An invitation. I opened it with numb fingers. "You're invited to Harper's housewarming." The words blurred, but what struck me harder was the name. Ms. Odalina Guest. I read it twice, then a third time. Not Odalyn, not even close. Just some careless, mocking version of me. It wasn't a typo. It was a message. You don't belong. The bile rose in my throat. She hadn't just stolen my financial security, she'd erased me. In her celebration of a house bought with my name, she couldn't even be bothered to spell it correctly. Or maybe that was the point. I clutched the invitation so tightly the edges bent. I should have stormed over, slammed the papers on her front door, demanded answers. But my phone buzzed, and without thinking, I dialed the one person who should have been in my corner. Mom. "Mom," I said, my voice unsteady. "Harper forged my signature. There's a loan in my name for over $1 million. Oh, Odalyn," she interrupted, her tone sharp, impatient. "Harper just wanted a better home for her and the kids. Don't make this about you." The words landed harder than the forged signature. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. "Don't make this about me," I whispered. "Mom, this is my life, my credit, my name." "You'll be fine. She's family. Stop acting dramatic." The call ended before I could say more. My throat burned. I sat there in the silence of my kitchen, tears stinging but refusing to fall. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. For a long while, I did nothing but breathe. In and out, counting the seconds, trying to calm the storm inside me. Every part of me screamed to act, to confront, to expose. But another part whispered caution. What if I couldn't prove it? What if she had covered her tracks so well the blame fell on me? What if this spiraled so far I lost everything I'd worked for? I slid the invitation into my desk drawer. Its misspelled letters glared up at me like a wound I couldn't close. I told myself softly, almost like a prayer, this isn't the end. Not yet. I would bide my time. I would keep quiet, for now. But silence wasn't surrender. It was preparation. Because when I finally stepped foot into Harper's new house, I realized the invitation wasn't the cruelest part, it was what waited for me inside. I parked a block away from Harper's new place, taking in the sheer size of it as I walked closer. The house loomed over the manicured lawns, its tall windows glittering in the sunlight, marble steps leading up to heavy double doors. The kind of house you saw in glossy magazines, impossibly perfect, and yet I knew the truth behind it. Every square foot had been bought with my name, my credit. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, and through the windows I caught glimpses of guests holding champagne flutes, laughing as servers passed trays of hors d'oeuvres I couldn't pronounce. I smoothed my blouse, my hands trembling despite the steady rhythm of my footsteps. The door swung open before I could knock. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in months smiled wide but shallow. "Oh, Odalyn, you made it." I stepped inside, my breath catching. The ceiling soared, light spilling across a sweeping staircase dressed with flowers. A crystal chandelier sparkled above a room filled with people who all seemed to know each other better than they knew me. Harper had staged everything down to the smallest detail, designer centerpieces, imported champagne, even a pianist tucked neatly in the corner. And all of it, mine, in a way I could never admit out loud. I moved carefully through the crowd, offering polite nods, feeling like I'd stepped into a play where I hadn't been given a script. Then Harper appeared. She was radiant in a fitted cream dress, holding a flute of champagne, surrounded by a circle of relatives who hung on her every word. When her eyes landed on me, her smile sharpened like a blade. "Well, well," she said loudly enough for the entire group to hear. "How did you even get in here?" The laughter came instantly, a ripple of chuckles and whispers that filled the air heavier than smoke. My face burned, but I forced a small, controlled smile. "Same way everyone else did," I said lightly, my voice steady though my heart pounded. She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Oh, I just didn't expect you to show up." Behind her, one of our cousins murmured, "She's always been so sensitive," as though I were a child unable to take a joke. My mother, standing just a few feet away, laughed nervously. "Oh, Harper, don't tease. You know your sister. She takes everything too seriously." Too seriously. The words sliced deeper than Harper's smirk. I stood in a mansion built on my signature, my silence funding her dream, yet I was treated like the outsider who should be grateful just to stand there. I excused myself, drifting toward the back of the room where the air felt less suffocating. I forced myself to breathe, my nails pressing into my palms. Rage clawed at me, begging for release, but I swallowed it down. Not here, not yet. When Harper called for everyone's attention, I returned to the crowd. She clinked her glass against a fork, her smile dazzling. "I just want to thank everyone who believed in me," she announced. "Without your support, none of this would have been possible." Names rolled off her tongue, neighbors, distant cousins, even an old teacher. My name never came. A neighbor, flushed from wine, clapped me on the shoulder. "Guess you're just here for the free drinks, huh?" I smiled tightly, my jaw aching from the effort. I wanted to scream the truth, to pull the bank notice from my purse and slap it on the marble counter for all to see. Instead, I heard my own voice in my head, soft but firm. Not yet. Because silence wasn't weakness. It was a weapon I was sharpening. Later, I slipped out onto the porch for a breath of air. That's when I noticed it. A dark sedan parked a few houses down, windows tinted, engine quiet. My chest tightened, but I kept my expression calm. I knew exactly why it was there. I turned back inside, letting the sound of laughter wash over me like acid on an open wound. Harper thought she'd won. She thought she could erase me with a forged signature and a smug smile. What she didn't know was that every cruel laugh in that room only made my next move sharper. The sound of laughter from Harper's house still clung to me as I shut my townhouse door behind me. The sudden quiet pressed in like a weight. I slipped off my shoes and stood in the dim entryway for a moment, staring at the familiar scuffs on the hardwood floor. My home was modest, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that had seen better days, but it was mine. And right now, it felt like the only corner of the world where I wasn't being judged, mocked, or erased. I made my way to the kitchen and dropped my purse on the table. The faint hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I poured myself a glass of water, but the metallic taste of humiliation still lingered on my tongue, the echo of Harper's sneer replaying in my head. On impulse, I opened the drawer where I'd stuffed that cursed housewarming invitation. The card sat there, the gold lettering still sharp under the weak kitchen light. Ms. Odalina Guest. Not even my real name. I traced the misspelled letters with my fingertip, my chest tightening. It wasn't just ink, it was Harper's way of saying, "You don't belong here." I sat down heavily, the invitation still in my hand, and memories I had tried to bury came rushing back. It was almost a year ago when Harper had shown up at my office with a stack of papers. "Just a routine form," she'd said, her voice syrupy sweet. "You know I'd never do anything to hurt you." She had laughed when I hesitated. "Come on, Odalyn. It's just a small loan. A little help from my baby sister. You've always been the dependable one." Back then, I wanted to believe her. I had signed where she pointed, thinking I was helping her start fresh, maybe finally win our mother's approval. Looking back, I could see the flicker in her eyes I'd ignored, the flicker that told me she knew exactly what she was doing. The thought made my stomach churn. I pushed back from the table, determined to find proof. I went to the small desk in my living room where I kept years' worth of bank statements and personal records. I pulled open the bottom drawer and started digging. It didn't take long. There it was, a folder, thick and heavy, crammed with documents. My hands trembled as I flipped through them. Page after page of forms, checks, and statements, all with my signature. Except they weren't mine. Some were shaky imitations, others so neat it was chilling. Each one tied me deeper into Harper's lies. Small loans at first, then bigger. Then the bombshell, the $1.2 million loan. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. This wasn't just about my pride. This could destroy my credit, my career, everything I had built. I dropped the papers onto the desk and buried my face in my hands, fighting the wave of panic rising in my chest. That's when the phone rang. I jolted upright, my throat dry as I grabbed the receiver. "Hello? Ms. Odalyn?" A calm, professional voice said. "This is Mr. Kelly from First Texas Bank. I'm calling regarding your mortgage loan." My pulse spiked. "There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid not," he said gently, but firmly. "Several payments have already been missed. If we don't receive the past due amount within the next 30 days, foreclosure proceedings will begin. As the account holder, you are legally responsible." The words blurred together, but the meaning hit like a hammer. Foreclosure. Legally responsible. My grip tightened on the phone until my knuckles ached. I didn't sign for that loan," I whispered. A pause. Then the banker sighed. "If you believe there's fraud involved, we strongly advise you to gather documentation and contact the authorities immediately." The line went dead after polite goodbyes, leaving me staring into the silence of my living room. I dropped the phone onto the couch and sat frozen, staring at the folder of forged documents. The weight of it was suffocating. My future, my name, was dangling by a thread, and Harper had the scissors in her hand. "She didn't just take my name," I said out loud, my voice shaking. "She took my future." Tears burned my eyes. but I wiped them away quickly. I'd wasted enough time crying. The truth slammed into me with brutal clarity. My silence had protected Harper, not me. Every time I swallowed the pain to keep the peace, she had stepped a little harder on me. No more. I gathered the papers carefully, sliding them into a plain manila envelope. I held it for a moment, my thumb brushing over the flap, and whispered to myself, "This is the end of her lies." I set the envelope on my nightstand before crawling into bed, though I knew sleep would be impossible. That night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, I made myself a promise. I'd stop being the sister she could step on. By the time morning sunlight spilled through my blinds, the promise I'd made to myself the night before had already settled into my bones. No more being the sister she could step on. I dressed carefully, choosing a blazer that made me feel less like a victim and more like the professional I was. The manila envelope sat on my kitchen table, waiting like a loaded weapon. I tucked it under my arm and drove toward downtown, each mile dragging me closer to the truth I could no longer ignore. Walking into the bank felt heavier than I'd imagined. The marble floors gleamed, polished so perfectly I could see my reflection in them. I took a breath and steadied myself. Harper had counted on my silence. But today, I wasn't silent. At the reception desk, I gave my name and was led into a private office. The man sitting across from me looked stern, but not unkind, his tie too tight and his eyes sharp with the weariness of someone who had seen far too many stories like mine. He opened the envelope and began flipping through the documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. "These signatures don't match," he said finally, his tone blunt, cutting through the tension like a knife. "Ms. Odalin, I believe your sister could be in very serious legal trouble." My chest tightened. "So this means I'm free of it?" I asked, clinging to a shred of hope. He shook his head. "Not exactly. Until an investigation is complete, the bank will still treat you as the liable party. If payments continue to be missed, foreclosure proceedings on your property could begin." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. My pulse raced as if invisible hands were wrapping around my throat. "So, I'm punished while she lives in luxury?" I whispered. His gaze softened a fraction. "If the investigation proves fraud, her assets could be frozen and you'd be cleared. But you'll need to decide whether to press forward. It won't be easy. These cases rarely leave families intact." I nodded, though my stomach churned. It wasn't just money on the line, it was my entire future. I thanked him, gathered the papers, and stepped back out into the lobby, the weight of the envelope pressing harder against my chest than when I'd walked in. The crisp Houston air slapped me as I exited the bank. I was heading toward my car when I froze. Harper's voice drifted toward me, loud and unmistakable. She stood a few feet away, phone pressed to her ear, her laughter carrying over the traffic. "Once the papers are cleared," she said, her tone dripping with smug satisfaction, "I'll buy the whole block. Can you imagine? They'll all know who runs this town." Her words burned into me. I clutched the envelope tighter, fighting the urge to confront her right there, to scream in her face that I knew everything. But I didn't. Not yet. I walked past her, my heels clicking against the pavement, my head high. She didn't even notice me. She doesn't see me, I thought, my jaw tightening. But she will. The drive home felt endless. By the time I reached my townhouse, evening shadows stretched long across the floor. I set the envelope back on the table and opened my laptop, pulling up the notes I'd taken during the meeting. The officer's words echoed. Her assets could be frozen. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. Families rarely survive such battles. I knew that was true, but I also knew the silence that had protected her for so long was the very thing destroying me. By nightfall, as the last rays of sunlight faded behind the blinds, my clarity was sharper than ever. I didn't feel fear anymore. I felt resolve. That night, I knew I had a choice. Save her or save myself. The kitchen was quiet, lit only by the dim glow from the stove clock. I sat at the table, the manila envelope spread open in front of me like a wound I couldn't close. The bank officer's words circled my mind over and over. If you act, there's no turning back. I pressed my fingertips to my temples, trying to block out the what-ifs. What if the investigation dragged on? What if Harper managed to twist the story, making me look like the villain? For a moment, the thought of letting it all go tempted me. Maybe silence was safer. Maybe being quiet again would keep the peace. That was when my phone buzzed. At first, I thought it was another reminder from the bank, but it was a voicemail, left hours earlier. I clicked play, my breath shallow. "Can you believe her?" Harper's voice, sharp and amused, filled my small kitchen. "She's too soft to fight back. She'll just cry in her little townhouse while I keep moving up." Honestly, I almost feel sorry for her. A laugh followed, not hers alone, but someone else's too. My chest clenched so tightly it hurt to breathe. This wasn't just fraud. This was cruelty. She hadn't only taken my name and my future, she had mocked me for the very silence that had protected her. I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the phone, listening to that voicemail replay in my mind like a knife twisting deeper each time. Finally, I whispered into the stillness, "You'll regret underestimating me." The next morning, I woke to a text from Harper. "Be at my housewarming. Family only. Don't embarrass us." Embarrass us. As if she hadn't humiliated me already. I almost deleted it, but instead, I stared at the words until my decision solidified. I'd go, not to celebrate, but to watch, to see exactly how far she thought she could push me. That afternoon, I drove to her mansion again. The street was crowded with cars, the kind of showy vehicles Harper loved to flaunt. Stepping inside, the grandeur struck me the same way it had before. Marble floors, tall ceilings, champagne on silver trays, guests in their finest. But this time, I wasn't blinded by the glitter. I slipped quietly into the crowd, staying to the edges. Harper floated through the room like a queen, glowing with self-satisfaction as she accepted congratulations. Every now and then, I caught relatives glancing my way, their smiles tight, their eyes sliding past me as though I were invisible. Then she saw me. Harper's lips curled into that smirk I knew too well. She raised her voice, loud enough for the whole room to hear. "Well, look who finally showed up. How did you even get in here?" The chuckles started small, then spread like wildfire. A cousin near me muttered, "She's always been too sensitive." Someone else laughed, their glass clinking. My cheeks burned hot, but I forced my expression neutral, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I told myself, not yet. The evening dragged on, each toast Harper gave another performance, each omission of my name another stab. She thanked everyone who believed in me, while her eyes skimmed right past me. A neighbor clapped me on the shoulder and joked, "Guess you're just here for the free drinks, huh?" I smiled thinly, but inside the voicemail's words played again, sharpening my resolve. Too soft. She had no idea. Later, I slipped out into the backyard. The air was cooler there, the hum of laughter muted behind the walls. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to Harper's voicemail. My thumb hovered over the play button, but I didn't press it. I didn't need to. Her voice was etched into me already. I whispered into the quiet night, "You'll regret underestimating me." My hands stopped trembling, replaced by a steady calm. For the first time, I believed it. And that was the night I stopped doubting myself and started planning her downfall. The night after the party, I sat in my small study, the manila envelope spread open once again. The lamp on my desk cast a pale glow over the scattered papers, my eyes following the signatures I knew weren't mine, the dates, the strokes of the pen. It was all Harper's handiwork. For years, I'd ignored the whispers in my gut, the sense that she had crossed lines I couldn't see. Tonight, it was undeniable. This wasn't a one-time betrayal. She had been stepping on me for a long time, and I had let her. I leaned back in my chair, the silence of the townhouse pressing in on me. My mind replayed that voicemail, her laughter, her certainty that I was too soft to fight back. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Not anymore." By mid-morning the next day, I found myself back at Harper's mansion. The street was crowded again, filled with cars that screamed of money and status. I parked 2 blocks away and walked slowly, clutching the envelope under my arm. I wasn't there to celebrate her. I was there to see her, to remind myself who I was dealing with. Inside, the house smelled of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. The chatter of guests filled the air. I stayed near the back, scanning the room until I spotted Aunt Lorraine, my mother's older sister. She was always the quiet observer in the family, never the loudest voice, but she remembered everything. "Adeline," she said softly, touching my arm. "Come with me a moment." We slipped into the sunroom, away from the noise. Lorraine looked tired, her gray eyes heavy with something more than age. She leaned close and whispered, "You know, this isn't the first time. Your sister forged your name years ago. I should have spoken up then." Her words settled over me like cold water. I gripped the envelope tighter. "Years ago?" My voice was barely a whisper. Lorraine nodded, shame flickering across her face. "It was smaller then. A car loan, maybe. I thought it was family business, that it would sort itself out. But I see now, I was wrong." I stared at her, the air thick between us. So it was true. My silence hadn't just protected Harper. Other people's silence had too. Before I could reply, Harper's voice cut through the hum of the party. "Adeline!" she called, her tone sweet but edged with steel. I followed her into the kitchen, where the laughter from the living room was muffled. She stood by the island, arms folded, eyes sharp. "What are you doing here?" I placed the envelope on the counter, sliding it toward her. "You tell me. These signatures—" I tapped the papers. "They're yours." Her smile faltered, just for a second, then returned sharper. She leaned in close, her words a hiss. "Do you really think this will stop me? Stay quiet if you know what's good for you." Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not with a scream, but quietly, like a thread finally breaking. I looked her straight in the eyes and said calmly, "You've mistaken my silence for weakness. That's ending tonight." Her face hardened. For a moment, I thought she might slap the envelope back at me. Instead, she spun on her heel and stormed out to rejoin her guests, her laughter floating back as though nothing had happened. I stayed in the kitchen, my pulse steady now. Lorraine's confession, the voicemail, Harper's threat. They all swirled together until one truth was clear. This had to end with me. I slipped my phone from my pocket, feeling the weight of the saved voicemail. I didn't press play. I didn't need to. The words echoed in my head already, fueling the quiet fire building inside me. "This ends with me," I whispered. And I meant it. By the time I left that evening, the decision was carved into my bones. I thought standing up would scare her into stopping. I was wrong. She wasn't done yet. That truth weighed heavy on me the next time I walked through the doors of her house, the air thick with the smell of champagne and catered food. It was supposed to be a party, another one of Harper's endless celebrations, but the moment I stepped inside, I felt every eye on me. Harper spotted me almost instantly. She glided across the room, her voice carrying louder than it needed to. "Well, look who finally showed up, the one who can't even manage her own life without me." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough. A few guests chuckled nervously, some avoided my eyes altogether. My cheeks flushed hot, and I forced myself to keep walking, not giving her the reaction she wanted. I found a quiet spot near the back, pretending to examine the art on the wall. My heart hammered in my chest, and I told myself, breathe, stay calm. But before long, Harper cornered me near the archway leading to the dining room. "Don't cause a scene," she said, her smile fixed, voice dripping with sugar. "You wouldn't want people knowing how much I've covered for you." Covered for me. The words stung. My fingers trembled, but I curled them into fists at my sides. I wanted to scream, to lay out every lie she'd ever told, but I swallowed the urge. Not yet. I started for the door, desperate to escape the weight of her words, when a gentle hand touched my arm. I turned to see Mrs. Darnell, the neighbor who'd lived down the street since we were kids. She leaned close, slipping a folded piece of paper into my hand. "You didn't hear this from me, dear," she whispered, her eyes flicking toward Harper. Confused, I tucked the paper into my purse before anyone could see. I left quietly, stepping into the cool night air, each breath feeling like a lifeline after the suffocating tension inside. At home, I unfolded the paper under the dim kitchen light. My stomach dropped. It was a printed photo from a real estate listing. Harper had used my name again, tied to another property deal. My knees gave out, and I sat heavily in the chair, the edges of the paper cutting into my palms as I gripped it. So it wasn't over. She wasn't stopping. Tears blurred my vision as I stared at the photo. For years, I had told myself keeping the peace mattered more than my pride. That family came before everything. But staring at that proof, I realized silence hadn't preserved my family. It had destroyed me piece by piece. I let the tears fall, just for a while. Then I wiped them away, pushing the papers and photos into a neat pile on the table. My chest still ached, but the ache wasn't just from humiliation anymore. It was from a new kind of clarity. Lorraine's words echoed in my mind. Harper's smug threat in the kitchen replayed like a broken record. And now Mrs. Darnell's quiet warning sealed it. This wasn't about keeping peace. It was about survival. I opened my laptop and began a new folder. Into it went scans of the forged signatures, the voicemail, and the real estate photo. My fingers moved slowly, but with purpose. I wasn't just gathering proof anymore. I whispered to myself as I saved the files, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside. This time, I'm not backing down. The glow of the screen reflected in my tired eyes as the clock crept past midnight. I knew I couldn't undo the years I'd wasted being quiet, but I could make sure Harper never used me again. I wasn't just preparing evidence anymore. I was preparing for war. By the time I returned to Harper's house, the party was still going strong. The clinking of glasses, bursts of laughter, and faint music made it sound like the kind of evening neighbors would talk about for weeks. But to me, it felt like walking into enemy territory. Harper was radiant, dressed in a gown that screamed money, her arm draped around the shoulder of a cousin who'd clearly had one too many drinks. She noticed me instantly, her smile twisting into something more calculated than kind. "Well, everyone," she announced, raising her glass high, "before we wrap this up, I have something important to share." The crowd hushed, curious. My chest tightened as she reached into a sleek leather folder and pulled out a stack of papers. She glanced at me briefly, her eyes glittering like a predator about to pounce. "These," she said, waving the packet for effect, "are documents proving what many of you have suspected. My sister has been struggling for years. Mentally, emotionally, honestly, she's not fit to handle serious financial matters." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Another whispered, "That explains a lot." My throat burned. For a split second, I felt myself shrinking back into that familiar role. The weak one, the sister always too soft to fight. I could almost hear Mom's voice in the back of my mind. Harper just wanted a better life. Don't make this about you. Harper placed the papers down with a flourish. "I know she's been making accusations, but please, Don't be fooled. She's unstable. I've covered for her more times than I can count. The humiliation was suffocating. My hands trembled at my sides, but instead of speaking, I inhaled slowly, letting the silence settle. I could feel eyes darting between her and me, waiting for me to crack. I stepped forward. Without a word, I placed my own manila envelope on the table, the sound of it hitting the polished wood echoing louder than any outburst could have. The room stilled. Even the music from the speakers seemed quieter. Calmly, I opened the envelope and spread the documents inside. Foreclosure notices, bank statements, and a signed confirmation from the officer handling the case. I looked Harper square in the eyes. "Funny," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest, "because the bank and the state of Texas disagree." The front door creaked, and heads turned as a man in a dark suit stepped inside. It was the officer who'd been parked outside earlier. He gave me a nod and then addressed the room. "We're here to confirm active proceedings. Ms. Harper used her sister's identity without authorization." The color drained from Harper's face. She opened her mouth, but only a strangled sound came out. Neighbors began whispering, some backing away from her as if fraud were contagious. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly avoided my gaze, shame etched across her face. This can't be real," Harper stammered, clutching the falsified documents she'd just waved so proudly. "She's lying. She's always been jealous." But no one was listening anymore. The officer placed a hand on the documents I'd provided. "These are official. We'll be following up." Harper's hand trembled as she tried to gather her papers, but the polished confidence she'd paraded around all evening had shattered. I stood taller, not needing to say another word. For once, the silence wasn't my cage. It was my weapon. As the crowd shifted uncomfortably and Harper's perfect party dissolved into a murmur of shame and speculation, I thought to myself, maybe this was the end. But deep down, I knew better. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. The housewarming was unraveling faster than anyone could hold it together. Guests shuffled out in silence, their champagne glasses left half full on tables. The once proud chatter had shrunk to whispers, glances, and the occasional shake of a head. The grand chandelier above Harper's marble foyer cast long, cold shadows that only made the room feel emptier. I stayed where I was, standing near the staircase, watching as Harper's confidence finally collapsed. She was clutching the falsified papers she had flaunted minutes earlier, her hands trembling so hard they rattled against each other. The officer calmly handed her the notice. His words were clear and cutting. "This property is now under dispute. Effective immediately." The silence after that felt like a hammer hitting stone. Harper's knees buckled. She dropped to the floor, her gown pooling around her like a crumpled curtain. For the first time in my life, I saw my sister look small. She crawled toward me, grabbing my hands with a desperation that nearly broke my resolve. Her mascara streaked down her face, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard before. "Please, Odalyn," she begged, her grip like iron. "Don't let them take everything. You're my sister. You can fix this. You always fix things." Those words sliced deeper than any insult she had ever hurled, because I had begged her once, in my own quiet way, begged her for kindness, for recognition, for a scrap of respect. And every time she'd answered with cruelty, greed, and mockery. For a moment, I simply looked at her, her tears dripping onto my skin. I remembered the nights I sat alone in my modest kitchen, staring at bills with her name written over mine. I remembered the laughter of relatives when she erased me at her first party. I remembered the voicemail where she called me too soft to fight back. But tonight, there was no rage left in me, only clarity. I leaned down just enough so only she could hear. My voice was steady, quiet, but it landed harder than any scream. "I forgave you once, and you used it against me. Her sob broke into the air like glass shattering, but I didn't flinch. I slipped my hands from hers and stood tall. Harper collapsed fully onto the polished floor, her sobs echoing against the marble walls, while relatives looked away, unable to watch the fall of the golden daughter they had once praised. I walked toward the front door, the cool night air calling me like freedom itself. As I stepped outside, the silence felt different now, lighter, cleaner. In my pocket, I felt the crumpled invitation, the one Harper had sent, with my name misspelled, almost mocking me. I pulled it out, smoothing it gently with my fingers. It no longer stung. It was just paper now, a reminder. I tucked it into my coat pocket, not as a wound, but as a promise. Never again. The street was quiet. Neighbors lingered near their cars, some giving me small nods, some too ashamed to meet my eyes. I didn't need their words. I had finally spoken mine. I didn't smile, not yet. Healing wouldn't be instant. But as I stood there, breathing in the cool night air, I knew one thing. My worth no longer depended on Harper's approval, or anyone else's. Family can be the ones who wound you deepest. But sometimes, walking away is the only way to finally heal.